Okay, this is the Day of Atonement. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron who died when they approached the Lord. So again, as I said previously, we do actually get a narrative time frame for this particular saying. This had to have happened after the events in Leviticus 10. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron not to come whenever he chooses, into the most holy place, behind the curtain, in front of the atonement cover on the ark, or else he will die. Because I appear in the cloud over the atonement cover." So remember that? So inside, they had this big tent, this big rectangular shaped tent. That is their tabernacle, the tent of meeting. That's where they conduct their sacrifices. And they have their table for their holy meals after some of their sacrifices. And they have the lampstand and the altar of incense there. At the back, and the tent always faces east. Okay, the tent is mobile. It can be taken down and moved. It's kind of like a traveling carnival. If you've ever seen them take apart the rides of a carnival and pack them back up in their trucks and then move on again, it's like that. It can be taken apart, disassembled, put into pieces that can be carried along and then reassembled when they get to their next destination. And always is set up facing east. That's the direction of the rising sun. And so that means the back of the temple, the back of the tabernacle is to the west. And the back of the tabernacle, in the inside part, the inside the tent, is this smaller tent, which is towards the west end of the back of the tabernacle. And it's a smaller tent. And inside that tent is the Ark of the Covenant. And on top of the Ark of the Covenant, of course, is this lid. They call it the mercy seat, the lid of the Ark, basically. And there's these two statues of cherubim that are facing each other, and they have their wings arranged in such a way their wings are somehow like reaching over their shoulders and touching each other. And this basically serves as God's throne. Okay, there is a cloud. We saw this at the end of Exodus, a cloud representing the presence of God that descended from the sky, took up residence on top of this mercy seat, this lid of this box, the Ark of the Covenant, on top of these statues of these wings, these cherubim. So this Ark of the Covenant, basically, in the statues of the cherubim and all that, basically serves as God's throne. Okay, his throne on earth. Earth is his footstool, they say in later scriptures. This is where God is taking up residence with his people on this planet. Okay, and he's represented in the form of some sort of cloud. And his presence is so holy, and the Israelites are unholy, that they can't just go into his presence whenever they feel like. And of course, this whole setup, this Ark of the Covenant with this cloud representing God on top of it, is set off from the rest of the tent by its own little tent within the greater tent, and there's this curtain in front separating the priests who are inside the tabernacle from God who's inside the tent within the tabernacle. So God is so holy, and the Israelites, even the priests who are his mediators, are so unholy that they can't just go into God's presence whenever they feel like it, because God appears in the cloud over the atonement cover. This is how Aaron is to enter the sanctuary area. There is a way to do it, but only under these very specific conditions. With a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He is to put on the sacred linen tunic with linen undergarments next to his body. He is to tie the linen sash around him and put on the linen turban. So he is not wearing the typical high priest blue robe and ephod and all that, gold diadem. He's now wearing an outfit more similar to the regular priests, just a regular linen tunic. These are sacred garments, so he must bathe himself with water before he puts them on. So these are not exactly the same thing as the regular priest clothes, but they are not also the high priest clothes, which he normally wears. From the Israelite community, he is to take 2 male goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin offering, to make atonement for himself and his household. So again, that's a clue right there that this system isn't really taking care of sin, because the priest always has to make atonement for himself first. To really get rid of sin, we need someone who doesn't have to make atonement for himself. And Aaron does, and all the priests after him will have to. So they're not really capable of dealing with the sin problem. Then he is to take the 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. That's the greater tabernacle. He is to cast lots for the 2 goats. 1 lot for the Lord, that's the one that's going to be sacrificed, and the other for the scapegoat. In Hebrew, this word is azazel. Aaron shall bring the goat whose lot falls to the Lord and sacrifice it for a sin offering. We've already read about how to do that, so it's just a regular procedure of a sin offering. But the goat chosen by lot as the scapegoat, or the azazel, shall be presented alive before the Lord to be used for making atonement by sending it into the desert as a scapegoat. Aaron shall bring the bull for his own... We're going to get back to that in a moment. We're not done with that yet. Aaron shall bring the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household. And he is to slaughter the bull for his own sin offering. He is to take a censer full of burning coals from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense, and take them behind the curtain. So now he is finally going behind the curtain. Now he is entering the presence of God. He is to put the incense on the fire before the Lord, and the smoke of the incense will conceal the atonement cover above the testimony so that he will not die. He is to take some of the bull's blood, and with his finger sprinkle it on the front of the atonement cover. Then he shall sprinkle some of it with his finger 7 times before the atonement cover. He shall then slaughter the goat for the sin offering for the people, and take its blood behind the curtain. So he's going back out to offer the sacrifice. He's going back in again with the new sacrifice's blood, and do with it as he did with the bull's blood. So the bull was for himself and his family, his household, and his descendants. I mean, that's kind of continuing on, not just in their, in their mindset and their thinking. It's not just his current household. It's all those that will arise from his loins in generations to come. So that was his sacrifice, his offering. Now this goat is for the people. He shall sprinkle it on the atonement cover and in front of it. And this way he'll make atonement. Hang on a second, the phone is ringing. Okay. In this way, through offering this sin offering for the goat, and then taking its blood and sprinkling it on the seat and on the cover, sprinkle on the atonement cover and in front of it, so on top of it and in front of it. In this way he'll make atonement for the most holy place, because of the uncleanness and rebellion of the Israelites, whatever their sins have been. So in order for a holy God to dwell with an unholy people, atonement must be made, and this is the way they're making. This is symbolic. Okay, this is a ritual. All right, the blood of this bull and these goats and all that is not actually taking away the people's sin. When Aaron follows these instructions, he's not actually, God is not making atonement or forgiving the Israelites on the basis of this ritual. Now he has given this ritual to them as a way for them to be faithful to him and follow his instructions, and show that they are doing what he wants them to do under the covenant that he has established with them. But this is not the basis by which he is actually forgiving their sins. He is forgiving their sins on the basis of what he knows will happen down the road when Christ goes to the cross. That's the basis for forgiveness of sins, both before the cross and after the cross. Whichever side of the cross you live on, your sins are forgiven on the basis of of that event. Even before it happened, God knew from before he said anything, but God knew from before he said, "Let there be light." And back in Genesis 1:2, he knew that he was going to do that. And so all those sins he was forgiving before that happened were being forgiven on the basis of God's knowledge, his certain knowledge that was going to happen someday. So these sacrifices and these rituals that they're following are not actually taking away their sin. They're not actually making atonement for them. But this is the covenant system that God has established for these people to show their faithfulness to him and by which he is forgiving their sins, again on the basis of what he knows will happen later on. But these sacrifices themselves are not actually taking, that's why they have to keep offering it every year. As the writer of Hebrews will say, if these sacrifices could take away sin, sooner or later they would do so. But offering these sacrifices year after year for 1,500 or so years, they never did take away sin. And they never would either. They could have been offering them in the 2,000 years since then. They stopped offering the sacrifices in the summer of 70 A.D. I don't know the exact day. I've read it before. I think it was sometime like August 9th or something like that. Maybe that's when the city fell. They ran out. They finally stopped offering the sacrifices. I presume they just ran out of animals a few weeks before the city fell that summer of 70 A.D. and they not offered one since. Even if they had been offering sacrifices ever since then, and there had been 2,000 Days of Atonements, 2,000 more Days of Atonement that have been celebrated in the intervening years. Even if they had, they wouldn't have done anything. In this way, he will make atonement for the most holy place because of the uncleanness and rebellion of the Israelites, whatever their sins have been. He is to do the same for the tent of meeting, which is among them in the midst of their uncleanness. So God is dwelling with these people in his dwelling place, despite them being an unclean people. No one is to be in the tent of meeting from the time Aaron goes in to make atonement in the most holy place until he comes out, having made atonement for himself, his household, and the whole community of Israel. Then he, Aaron, shall come out to the altar that is before the Lord, and make atonement for it. He shall take some of the bull's blood and some of the goat's blood, and put it on all the horns of the altar. Remember, the corners of the altar, they had horns. He shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times, to cleanse it and to consecrate it from the uncleanness of the Israelites. So even the altar needs to be consecrated. Even the altar needs to be cleansed from the uncleanness of the Israelites. When Aaron has finished making atonement for the most holy place, the tent of meeting, and the altar, he shall bring forward the live goat. Remember, one of these goats was chosen to stay alive, at least for now. So what's this goat going to do? What's this goat's response? Now, this is not present in any of the other sacrifices or rituals they have. Now, these bulls and goat offerings that Aaron is offering here follow the same ritual that the other bulls and goat offerings do, except for him bringing the blood into the holy place and sprinkling it on the horns of the altar. The actual method of the sacrifice itself is the same. We didn't even cover that here, because it follows the same rules as the other sacrifices. This is different. This is one specific exception. This live goat ceremony they do with this scapegoat, this azazel. It's the only time that the only time of the year they do this. Where am I? He shall bring forward the live goat. He is to lay both hands on the head of the live goat, and so both hands this time, and confess over it all the wickedness and rebellion of the Israelites, all their sins, and put them on the goat's head. Excuse me. He shall send the goat away into the desert in the care of a man appointed for the task. So before they do this ceremony, they would have to assign someone the role of actually taking this goat away. The goat will carry on itself all their sins to a solitary place, and the man shall release it in the desert. So they're going to take this goat. So they have symbolic. So Aaron has put his hands on the goat's head, both hands this time, holding, I guess, onto the whole goat's head, and has confessed all the sins of Israel onto the goat's head. Aaron wouldn't possibly know every single sin the Israelites have committed. This would be similar to what Daniel does in the book of Daniel when he prays for all their misdeeds and their misdoings, even though he obviously is not aware of specifically every single one of them. And he counts himself among them, even though he was a faithful, holy man. Aaron is doing that here too. He is communicating his sorrow and grievance over all the sins and wrongdoings the Israelites have done, whether he knows them or not, whether the people themselves know them or not. And by doing this, he is symbolically passing these sins, symbolically, not actually doing it, but symbolically passing these sins onto the goat. So this goat now carries these sins, symbolically carries these sins, and then they're going to take these sins, which are symbolically being carried in this goat, and cast it out into the wilderness. So these sins are being removed from the people. They're being removed from the community. They're being cast out into the wilderness. Then Aaron is to go into the tent of meeting and take off the linen garments he put on before he entered the most holy place, and he is to leave them there. He shall bathe. I'm not sure if that means the most holy place, the tent of meeting. I guess the tent of meeting. I don't think they're in the most holy place, but he shall bathe himself with water in a holy place, and put on his regular garments. These are the regular high priest robes, I suppose. Then he shall come out and sacrifice a burnt offering for himself, and the burnt offering for the people, to make atonement for himself and for the people. He shall also burn the fat of the sin offering on the altar. So there's our actual burning up of the animal sacrifices. The man who releases the goat as a scapegoat. So this guy is going out in the desert with this goat and then letting it go, releasing it in the desert, carrying the sins away from the people. So he's going to come back now after he's done that. He's not going to go live in the desert with the goat. So he comes back. He must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. Afterward he may come into the camp. The bull and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought into the most holy place to make atonement, must be taken outside the camp. Their hides, flesh, and offal are to be burned up. The man who burns them, I don't know if it's the same guy or a different guy, must wash his clothes and bathe himself with water. Afterward he may come into the camp. This is to be a lasting ordinance for you. On the 10th day of the 7th month, you must deny yourself. So this isn't just any given day of the year. We talked at the beginning of the chapter about this happening, Aaron not being able to go into the most holy place whenever he feels like it. Whenever he goes into the most holy place, he has to follow all these instructions and rules. And he can only do it on this one day of the year. He's not able to do this with any given day he feels like. It's going to be on the 10th day of the 7th month, and only on the 10th day of the 7th month. You must deny yourselves and not do any work, whether native born or an alien living among you, because on this day atonement will be made for you, to cleanse you. Then, before the Lord, you will be clean from all your sins. It is a Sabbath of rest, and you must deny yourselves. It is a lasting ordinance. The priest who is anointed and ordained to succeed his father as high priest is to make atonement. So the high priest alone does this. Whether it's Aaron or I think Eleazar is the one who becomes the high priest after him, or any other after them. It's only the high priest who does this. He is to put on the sacred linen garments and make atonement for the most holy place, for the tent of meeting and the altar, and for the priests and all the people of the community. This is to be a lasting ordinance for you. Atonement is to be made once a year for all the sins of the Israelites. And it was done as the Lord commanded Moses. So he offers, first of all, a bull offering for himself and his family, his household. And by that we really mean all the descendants that come after him. We think of a household as being the people who live in our house. In this context, they were really referring to all the people who are in his loins, that are going to come out of his loins in later generations. And then he offers this goat as an offering, a sin offering for the people. And then they have this other goat, which symbolically takes on the sins of the people, and then gets carried out of the community into the wilderness and released there. So he's carrying the sins away from the people out into the wilderness, the desert around them, and being cast out of the community, basically. It says nothing here about tracking down this scapegoat later on and killing it. From what I understand, later generations of Israelites did this. They would mark this scapegoat somehow so that later on they would go out to the desert and find it and kill it anyway, throwing it off a cliff or something like that. I'm not sure. I don't really know about that. It doesn't say to do that here. But The idea is that one goat gets sacrificed in their usual sin offering, and one goat gets this sin symbolically passed on to it and cast out into the wilderness. And there is a lot here also in the sense of the sins being cast out. Jesus himself was crucified outside the city, so there's an element. The Day of Atonement is partially fulfilled. The fulfillment of the Day of Atonement comes when Jesus is cast out of the city and all the sins are passed on to him, and he is crucified and dies. Now, this scapegoat is not specified as needing to be killed when it's taken out of the community. Like I said, from what I understand, later generations of Israelites did that. That's not part of the instructions here. But Christ was taken outside the city, crucified, had all the sins of the world passed on to him, and crucified outside the city gates. And there are a couple of concepts here also that I think are important to keep in mind, in that the sins are being taken outside the city and cast out, and the animals themselves, of course, get burned up. And even here in this ceremony, they get their refuse gets burned up outside the camp. And in the context of the entire book of Leviticus, we've seen this for judgment. When you do commit sins, there are basically three kinds of punishment. For lesser crimes, for lesser offenses, you offer your sin or guilt offering. You pay back what you stole or took from the offended party, and then you offer your sin or guilt offering. Some sins carry the death penalty, and then others you get excommunicated, which in some cases could mean the death penalty, and in some cases could just mean getting cast out of the community. There's no real concept of prison here in their penal system. You don't commit a sin and then get sentenced to 12 years in prison or something like that. Now there is, when we get a little bit later on, there is this idea of sanctuary cities where you can live for a while, and we'll get to that later. But which is kind of similar, but really the idea of imprisonment for crimes is not a part of it's not a part of their society.